A century before it occurred, Isaiah prophesied the downfall of Israel. In this lesson, Isaiah predicts a reversal of fortune and talks of the fall of Babylon and the return of the people to Jerusalem. When he commands the people to lift their eyes, he is saying more than just lift your eyes. He is telling them that their fortunes have changed from one of despair to one of hope. Remember, as Israel first reads this writing, they're still under Babylonian captivity. Jerusalem has been destroyed. They question whether they will ever be an independent nation again if God has turned his back on the promise to Abraham. The scripture compares Israel to a bride. Brides dress to impress on their special day, and the scripture says that you will have reason to celebrate Israel, to dress in your finest. The scripture to Israel gives advice that is relevant today. It says you have reason to hope because of God. Israel can breathe in the fresh air of relief with the assurance, as written here, that their enemies will be vanquished. Just as during captivity in Egypt, during Babylonian captivity, the Jewish population grew significantly and the nation could not hold them. But this was a generation that had never known Jerusalem or the joys of freedom. They knew only Babylon. They had no emotional ties to Jerusalem. So Isaiah prophesies that this Jewish nation is one that is disoriented, like the enslaved people of America as we celebrate Juneteenth. This generation of Israel had many who were happy for their freedom, but they would also have many who were fearful about the challenges ahead, not knowing how to hope. The years of exile would create in them a gap between the one generation and the other, an older generation with deep ties rooted in Jerusalem and a younger generation without any emotional connection to the Jewish homeland. Even with the prediction that some of Israel will struggle with the concept of freedom, the scripture says that the Lord will beckon his people to come, using foreign nations to accomplish his plan for Israel. The scripture says that they will bring their sons in their arms and carry their daughters on their hips, taking the future of Israel out of Babylonian captivity and back to Jerusalem. God tells Israel how important they are to him, saying that he will have kings and queens to nurture and take care of them, that even those in high places will bow down before them, humbling themselves before the children of Israel. And in fact, God uses the Persian king to carry out his plan. I keep going back to the fact that Israel was under Babylonian captivity, and so the scripture is predicting that they will be free, and it does it in pretty much detail. This unlikely freedom would require kings and queens to help free them, to nurture them, and to humble themselves to Israel. Think about this. Israel is not escaping. They're being helped back to Jerusalem by more powerful nations. Isaiah asserts with all of that, they will know the Lord. This return to Israel is rather miraculous in this day, let alone in that day. The writer tells us that among the Jewish people, as in every group, in every movement, some will remain true to the traditions, in this case, the religious traditions of Judaism. Predictably, there was tension that would grow among the people, some who would be seeking to follow the new ways, the pagan ways of the Babylonians. For a generation to leave the place they had grown familiar with and go back to a land that was at best in shambles takes faith in God. And that's why knowing God through his words and his actions was important to Israel then, and it is important to us today. That's the lesson for this week. Have a great week. Bye.